Hi everyone! We have finally arrived at the topic of conversion sliders. This is one of my favorite things to do in Outfit Studio, and it's actually what got me into using this program in the first place. I'll tell you that story in a minute. Sliders are powerful tools, but there are some important considerations that you need to know. So today is an introduction to using sliders in Outfit Studio, and we'll be covering the following points. You may be familiar with the body sliders used from within BodySlide to change a body or an outfit's shape. But you can use sliders for a number of other things, including converting meshes from one size to the other, or converting from one body type to another. We'll be using conversion sliders a lot in the rest of this series, and in the BodySlide series. So it will be really helpful for you to get a good foundational understanding of how they work and what limitations they have. You may have heard me say that I used to use Blender for all my outfit work, and this is true. But I finally hit a breaking point after spending many hours in Blender creating only the size 0 versions of several mashups, and then not being able to face the prospect of doing it all again to make the size 1 versions. Along came Dragoon23 and a video posted on their channel that showed how you can make a slider in Outfit Studio to convert from one size to another. I watched that video and had my world changed for good. I immediately downloaded Outfit Studio and have never looked back. So here is a heartfelt thank you to Dragoon23. I don't know if I ever would have gotten started with Outfit Studio if not for that first eye-opening video. Please see the link to Dragoon23's channel in the description and head over there to show them your support. This may seem like a stupid question, but let's talk for a minute about what a slider actually is. Sliders are just a way to morph shapes. This happens in Skyrim when you use the weight slider bar, and if you recall from video number 11, it works by using the size 0 NIF and the size 1 NIF to create any shape in between the two. BodySlide and Outfit Studio use this same concept to give us an easy way to morph body and outfit shapes. But instead of just being able to weight slide, these applications have expanded on the idea in a very clever way so that we can morph a mesh to all kinds of new shapes. So the basic premise remains the same. You have one mesh at a minimum starting shape, let's call it 0%, and one mesh at a desired maximum end shape, let's call it 100%, and we can use a slider to adjust the shape to be anything along the scale from 0 to 100%. Those 0 and 100 meshes set the upper and lower boundaries, but more importantly, they provide the map for how vertices should move in between the two shapes. And that's all a slider really is. The roadmap for how vertices should move to create a new shape based on the relative position of the vertices in the two shapes that were used to make it. For the rest of this discussion, we are going to focus on what you need to make your own conversion sliders. But note that all sliders work pretty much the same way, including the body sliders that make an outfit BodySlide compatible. With that said, BodySlide projects and the reference bodies that have sliders attached are their own separate topic. So please be aware that working with body sliders to make an outfit BodySlide compatible has some special considerations that may differ a bit from what we discuss in this video. We will cover BodySlide projects and reference bodies a bit later in the series. You can make a slider with just one mesh by directly editing it into a new shape, or by choosing vertices you want to be deleted and making a zap slider. But mostly, you'll probably want to morph between two existing shapes. And to do that, you have to start with two matching meshes. By matching, I mean they have exactly the same number of vertices, and all those vertices have to be in the same order. Refer back to video number 11, where we talked about how weight sliding works in Skyrim. The two meshes must have the same number of vertices because you can't make a roadmap for how each vertex should move if every vertex in the starting shape does not have an obvious twin in the ending shape. That's just how the algorithm works. If you try to make a slider using two shapes that don't have the same number of vertices, then you will get an error message in Outfit Studio. In contrast, you can make a slider with two meshes if their vertices are in a different order, but it won't work very well. And that's because of math again. Remember that the vertices making up your mesh are numbered from 1 to whatever, and the algorithm behind the slider is checking to see where each vertex is in the starting shape and where it is in the ending shape. It doesn't know if a vertex has been renumbered, so it just morphs each one from the start position to the end position. And this means that if you make a slider in Outfit Studio using two shapes with vertices numbered differently, you're going to get something that looks like this. So always remember this rule. The two meshes used to make a slider must have the same number of vertices, and all the vertices have to be in the same order. If they are not, then you can't use those meshes to make a working slider. The quick answer to this question is that you can use any mesh or meshes to make a slider. Just remember that the starting and ending shapes must have the same vertex number and vertex order. You can use NIFs, or you can use other 3D mesh file types, such as OBJ and FBX. You can get really creative and make sliders with all kinds of meshes, but most often you will see the body itself used to make a slider. And that's because the body is probably the most useful slider to have. It's good for size conversions, body type conversions, and just general morphing of outfits using the BodySlide reference sliders. But don't forget that you can make any other kind of slider that you find useful. Here are some examples. The sky's the limit here, so get creative and explore how sliders can make your life easier when it comes to editing meshes in Outfit Studio. For the rest of this video, I'll be focusing on making a slider using two separate meshes, one for the starting shape and one for the ending shape. But remember that you can edit a single mesh directly, and that may be useful to you in certain situations. To make a slider with two matching meshes, one for the starting shape and one for the ending shape, the process goes like this. Load your starting mesh. Then select it, go to Slider, and choose New Slider. Type in a relevant name and hit OK. This creates the slider for our starting shape, but it won't actually do anything yet until we import the ending shape. To do that, click the little pencil next to the slider to put it in edit mode. It will turn purple. Then go back up to Slider, select Import Slider Data, and import NIF, or whatever file type your ending shape is. Navigate to wherever your ending shape is located, select it, and hit Open. You should see that the starting shape has now been morphed to the ending shape. Click the pencil next to the slider again to exit edit mode. It will turn gray and reset the shape back to the starting mesh. Now move the slider back and forth and watch the mesh morph from the starting shape to the ending shape and back again. This is simple and straightforward as long as you remember a few important points. First, remember that your starting mesh and ending mesh must have the same number and order of vertices. If you don't, then you'll either get an error message and can't make the slider at all, or you'll be able to make the slider, but it's going to be all wonky. Second, note that you can only morph from one single mesh to another single mesh. This means you have to select a single mesh to create the slider, and then note that if your ending NIF contains more than one mesh, meaning more than one BS tri shape, then only the first one on the list in the NIF will be imported to the slider. So you either need to make sure the mesh you want to use for the slider has been isolated so that it's the only mesh in the file, or at least make sure the NIF you want to import has the ending mesh as its first BS tri shape. If you want to make a slider that includes a combination of meshes, for example, the body, hands, and feet, then you have to first merge those meshes in the starting shape and then merge them exactly the same way in the ending shape. And you must be very careful when you do this so that the vertices stay in the same order. One final point here. The meshes you use to make a slider don't actually have to work in the game. By this, I mean that they don't have to have bone weights, partitions, or textures. And they can be merged shapes that you would never use in Skyrim, like the whole body slider that I just mentioned. You can create these tool meshes temporarily, use them to make the slider, and then, as long as you save the slider as a project, you can actually delete them when you are done. The data associated with the slider is saved to the project, and not to those original 3D model files. Each slider can only go one way, from one starting shape at 0% to one ending shape at 100%. I'll call this a forward slider for the purpose of this discussion. But you can also make a second slider that goes the other direction, from the ending shape back to the starting shape, and I call this a backward slider. To add a backward slider, you first have to set the ending shape as your new starting shape. This is easy. Just move the forward slider to 100% and go to Slider, Set Base Shape. Now you can add another slider to morph this new shape. And this is exactly the same process as making the forward slider. With the mesh selected, go to Slider, New Slider, give it a name, and then click OK. Then click the pencil for the new slider to put it in edit mode, and go to Slider, Import Slider Data, Import NIF, or whatever file type your original starting mesh is in. Navigate to the original starting mesh, which will now be our ending mesh in this backward slider. Select it and hit Open. You should see the mesh morph back to the original starting shape. Click the pencil to exit Slider Edit mode, and the mesh will revert back to the original ending shape, which is the starting shape for this new slider. Now you have a backward slider in case you need to convert a mesh in the opposite direction. The only trick to this is making sure you know which of the two sliders is primed, meaning the current base shape of the mesh matches the starting shape of the slider. Let's reset this one so that the top slider is ready to use. Move the second slider to 100% and go to Set Base Shape. Now we are back to the original starting shape, and this is primed to use the first slider again, which is our forward slider. If you use a slider whose starting shape does not match your current base shape, then you're going to get weird morphing. But with two sliders, one forward and one backward, you can easily reset the base shape to whichever starting shape you need. If you want to prime the backward slider, simply move the forward slider to 100% and go to Slider, Set Base Shape. Now the backward slider is ready to use. And to reprime the forward slider, follow the same process on the backward slider, and then your forward one will be ready to be used again. To keep any sliders you make, you have to save them as a project. Go to File, Save Project As, and then give it a relevant name. Click on To Project and the other boxes will automatically populate. If your custom slider is not actually going to be used in BodySlide, then the rest of what's in here doesn't really matter. I'm not going to cover how to set up a BodySlide project right now, but what goes in these boxes will definitely matter for that. We'll discuss that in a future video. When you save a project in Outfit Studio, by default, it will go to, for Vortex users, the Skyrim data folder, Caliente Tools, BodySlide, and then the two folders Slider Sets and Shape Data. For MO2 users, it will either go to the Overwrite folder if you did not set a new location in the executable list, or it will go wherever that you pointed that to. Either location is fine, just note where to find it so that you can load it up again later anytime you want to use the slider. We can move these project files to a separate mod if you wish. If you do this, be sure to put them in the correct folder structure and activate the mod in your load order. I've made a separate video about managing projects, so please see that for more info. It's all well and good to make a slider and morph that single mesh from one shape to another. But it's not terribly useful if it only works on that mesh. What makes sliders so powerful is that you can apply them to brand new meshes to morph their shape based on the template provided by the slider. By default, only the reference mesh, which is the one used to make the slider, will change when you move a slider. No matter what kind of slider it is, whether it's one that you created, or one that is part of a body reference, or a BodySlide project, the slider won't affect any other meshes until you conform them. First, make sure the reference mesh is actually set as a reference, meaning it is shown in green text. If it's not, right-click on it and Set Reference. Then make sure the slider is set to the desired starting shape and morphs to the desired ending shape. If you have used your slider already and set a new base shape, then you'll have to either load in a fresh version of the slider or reset it if you have both a forward and a backward version. Next, load in the new mesh or meshes you want to morph. We have to conform these to the slider, and there are two options for this in the slider menu. You can conform all, which attaches all the meshes to the slider, or you can highlight just one or some of the meshes and conform selected. Choosing either option will open a pop-up window where you can change settings for how the mesh will behave when you move the slider. Most of the time, you can probably go with the default values here and just click OK. But do play around with the other options here if you are not happy with how the slider affects your mesh. Certain settings can provide better results in specific situations. For example, ticking the Solid Object box can help mitigate shape distortions, although it may not prevent them entirely. Once conformed, the mesh or meshes will now morph along with the slider. This is how you attach meshes to any slider, whether it's one that you made, or a conversion reference, or the full set of body sliders that become part of a BodySlide project. To convert the mesh or meshes from the start shape to the end shape, or anything in between, just move the slider to the position that you want, then go to Slider and Set Base Shape. The meshes will stick in the new shape, ready for whatever you plan to do next. Please note here that if you are simply attaching meshes to body sliders to turn your outfit into a BodySlide project, then you should not set base shape. You want the meshes to be conformed to all the sliders, but not glued into a new starting shape. It needs to remain free to morph across the full range from 0 to 100%. So let's talk about some limitations of sliders. And don't get me wrong, I love sliders, and I think BodySlide and Outfit Studio make brilliant use of them. But, like everything in life, they are not perfect. There are 3 limitations that I want to mention for your awareness. The first is related to making sliders for body conversions. You cannot use a slider to go directly from one body type to another body type. For example, from CBBE to BHUNP. That's because most bodies do not have the same number of vertices or have them in the same order. So to make a slider like this work, you have to use one of those bodies and edit it to recreate the shape of the other. And that means, for example, making the BHUNP shape with a CBBE body, or vice versa. and this is usually not easy. You can find more about this on the BodySlide wiki, which I'll link in the description. Explaining how to do it is beyond the scope of this video. Fortunately, that difficult task has already been completed for us with the most popular body mods, and you can find conversion references, which are sliders, between many body shapes. I'll be talking more about all of this soon when we get to body type conversions. The second limitation of sliders is that they can distort your mesh. This happens with any kind of mesh editing, but sliders can cause more extreme distortions since they don't have the human eye to act as a checks and balance. They just use math to put vertices in place, and the slider doesn't know if something looks good or bad. Distortions are especially obvious with geometric shapes like circles and squares, which are commonly used for buttons and buckles and things. And while you can ignore these, making outfits look their best means you really should correct any distorted parts. I'll explain some options for how to do that in our next video about working with sliders. The third limitation to note is that sliders don't generally work well for meshes that are far away from the reference mesh. For example, a skirt or a long sash or a pauldron that sticks way up or out from the shoulder don't usually morph sensibly along with the slider. You can mitigate this somewhat by setting a very large radius when you conform the mesh to the slider, but that doesn't always work. Full skirts in particular don't slide well, so you can expect to have to do more manual editing for these types of items. Sliders are really awesome, and they can make your outfit work so much easier. You'll be set up for success and ready to think of more ways to use sliders by taking the time to first understand the basics of making and using sliders in Outfit Studio. We will be doing a lot more with sliders in this series, starting with size conversions and progressing on to body type conversions. The principles covered in this introduction will apply to all of that, and will also apply to making BodySlide projects when we finally get there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next tutorial. Bye!